what we want to be able to do here is if we end up logging a user into the system, we want to be able to now make another request, something along the lines of localhost 3000, but this is not going to be a post request. This is going to be a get request. And there's no data that we're going to end up sending, but we're going to want to send a header that's going to be, you could name this really whatever you want to call it, but we'll say that this is going to be an authentication header. And I'm going to go in and copy this token. Of course, this route doesn't end up existing at this point, and I'll see that I can't get it, but what would that route look like? Well, also keep in mind that we're going to have a number of routes that we might want to send in with this header to identify the user. Again, we want to end up securing our application. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put some middleware in here. And, again, as long as it's ahead of any of the routes that you're going to end up using it with, then this will end up working fine. But I'm going to put some middleware here. And what I'm going to end up doing with this middleware is I'm going to tell my database, well, a couple first things first. One of the things I can do is I could check for the headers. And I could say, hey, look, is there an authentication header? That's going to be where my token is. So, one thing we could do is we could say, hey, look, if there's not one, then let's just get out of here and call next. There's really nothing to do here. But if there is one, then what we're going to end up attempting to do is that we're going to tell our DB to get user from token, and we're going to use the request headers authentication token. And if we end up doing this, we're going to end up getting back a user. Now, this is going to be a route that I'm going to use this for other routes, but now what I want to do is I can put actually on the request object for other routes, I could say, yep, this is the user who has made this request, and I want to end up calling next without an error. And if there's an error here, I want to end up calling next. And the last thing that I can end up doing here, and let's actually just make sure that I name this correctly. Let's look at our DB, right? If we end up looking at our get user, I think I did call it something different, find user from token, which is what I'm calling it here. Let's be very consistent, or else we're going to have errors. We'll end up calling find user from token. And now what we can end up doing here is that we could put in our get request. And again, why did I separate this out? Because again, we're going to want to have multiple requests where we're going to want to find out who the user is. And we could also end up just putting this on the header. So what we could do here is that if in fact we don't have a request.user, well, we really want to throw some kind of error here. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say error equals error not authenticated. And actually, it probably even makes sense to put a status here of 401 that you're not authenticated and call next with this error. Otherwise, we could end up just saying response.send. And let's actually say, hey, look, if this happens, let's get out of here. And otherwise, and again, I could put an else here too and not have to do the return, but let's send back the request user. And again, the assumption is that if you're calling this route, that you've got a token, and it's a token that's going to be a valid token. Now, if we go try to run this again, let's just take a look. Looks like we probably have an error message here. Let's just find it. Missing after argument list. Find it real quick. Find user from token. Here, this needs to be wrapped up here. And let's try this again. One thing that we'll end up finding out, and this is going to be, let's make sure I set this up. Auth is not correct. It's going to be API auth. Sorry about that. Try this one more time. And we'll get not authenticated because every time we run this, we're generating new users here. So we really have to call this one first. And then if we end up calling this and we go back and I take this token here and we'll go back and we're going to end up using this token probably makes more sense to do this from scratch here, but we'll give this a try. So now let's reuse this token that we just ended up getting back. And we'll see we were able to get Lucy's information. So now we've got this route that we could end up calling, and we could do this with different routes as well. So, I mean, if there was a route for, let's say, a user's things, it could be something along the lines of, you know, hey, look, here is a user things. And again, we could go in here and, you know, first of all, we know how to identify the user, and we could also make sure, hey, look, is the user that's making this request the same one that's on the request.user? And we could lock down any other routes. And if you want to end up hitting a route that you are not able to access, again, it could be because either you're not logged in or you didn't end up sending the header that we're using here. So now that we've got our server-side routes, we could go back and we could end up focusing on the client side.